It's a crisp Monday morning. Marcus, a mid-level executive in his 30s, walks into the office, his mind already racing with 1,000 things to do. But today is different. Today, something inside him shifts. He's tired. Tired of the stress, the burnout, the constant noise that drowns his sense of purpose. As he glances at his cluttered desk, his eyes fall on a small book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Something about this ancient text calls to him. He remembers what his mentor, Elena, once told him: control your mind, and you control your life. That simple statement sparks something in Marcus. He wonders if it's time to truly take control. No more reacting, no more surviving the chaos. Today, Marcus begins a new journey, one where he will learn to speak with purpose and live with power. Marcus had always been the hard-working, reliable guy in the office. But lately, his career had started to feel like a never-ending treadmill, and no matter how hard he ran, he couldn't get ahead. The constant pressure from his boss, the endless meetings, and the lack of time for himself had drained him. His relationships at home were suffering too. His wife, Sarah, had mentioned more than once how distant he had become, both physically and emotionally. He knew something had to change, but he didn't know where to start. That's when he met Elena, a senior executive who had risen through the ranks with grace and composure. She wasn't like the others. Elena wasn't frantic or reactive. She seemed calm, measured, and in control, even in the most stressful situations. When Marcus asked her how she managed to stay so grounded, she told him she had adopted Stoic practices. Stoicism isn't just about surviving life, it's about living it with intention, she explained. Elena's advice resonated with Marcus, but he was skeptical at first. The idea of controlling his thoughts, his words, his actions, was it really possible? But as the weeks went by, Elena's words echoed in his mind. She taught him the basics of Stoicism, starting with the idea that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. You are not your thoughts, Marcus, she said one day. You are the observer of those thoughts. You have the power to choose your reactions. That was the first seed Elena planted. Little did Marcus know, this was just the beginning of a transformation he hadn't even imagined yet. Marcus's objective became clear after his first encounter with Stoicism: he needed to regain control over his life. For years, he had been at the mercy of external pressures, his boss, his colleagues, the constant stream of demands. But Marcus realized that true success wasn't about meeting others' expectations or constantly rushing to check off tasks. It was about aligning his actions with his values, staying grounded in the present, and mastering his inner world. His goal wasn't to change his job or escape the stress, he wanted to change himself. Marcus understood that if he could control his reactions, his emotions, and the way he communicated, everything around him would shift. He wasn't looking for fame or fortune, he wanted peace of mind and to live with purpose. To speak with purpose and live with power, this was Marcus's new mission. Every morning, Marcus would wake up earlier than usual, sit in silence, and focus on his breathing. He began his day with a meditation, reflecting on what he could control and what he couldn't. He started to question his old ways of thinking. Why had he let external circumstances dictate his happiness? Why had he allowed stress and frustration to control his actions? Slowly, he found that, with practice, he could let go of the need for constant validation. Each day was a small step, a tiny victory toward becoming the person he had always wanted to be, a man who spoke with intention, lived with purpose, and, most importantly, was at peace with himself. Despite his best efforts, the pressure in Marcus's life continued to build. His boss, Gerald, a demanding and unyielding leader, set new, unrealistic targets for the team. The deadlines were tight, and the stakes were higher than ever. Marcus felt the weight of the responsibility. If the team didn't deliver, there would be consequences. The stress he had hoped to manage with Stoic practices was quickly creeping back into his mind, and Marcus found himself standing on the edge of the same frustration he had been trying to leave behind. At home, things weren't much better. Sarah, his wife, had become more distant, frustrated with his long hours and his constant preoccupation with work. Their dinner table conversations had become short and strained, with Marcus too distracted to even listen. He wasn't the husband he wanted to be, stoic or not, he was still failing in the areas that mattered most to him. The internal conflict between his professional responsibilities and his personal life was overwhelming. He found himself questioning if Stoicism was truly the answer to everything. Could he really stay calm and composed while his world was falling apart? One night, after a particularly grueling day, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen of his computer. His email inbox was filled with requests, demands, and complaints. His mind raced with thoughts of failure, of not measuring up. He wanted to lash out, to respond in anger and frustration, but something stopped him. He remembered Elena's words, "You can't control what happens, but you can control how you respond." With a sigh, Marcus closed his laptop. He felt trapped between two worlds, the Stoic wisdom he was trying to live by, and the overwhelming pressure of his job and family. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt defeated. His new purpose, his new mindset, didn't seem to be enough. How could he possibly speak with purpose when everything around him felt out of control? The following days were a blur of deadlines and growing tensions. Marcus found himself in a constant battle between what he knew to be true about Stoic philosophy and the overwhelming external pressures that threatened to undo his progress. His team was falling behind on their tasks, and every meeting felt like an interrogation. Gerald, his boss, was breathing down his neck, demanding results with little regard for the well-being of the team. Marcus could feel the familiar knots of anxiety tightening in his chest. At home, things continued to worsen. Sarah's frustration was becoming more apparent. One evening, she confronted him after dinner, her voice shaking with emotion. "Marcus, I can't do this anymore," she said. "You're never here, physically or mentally. All you care about is your job. You don't even see me anymore." The words stung. Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain how hard he was working, but something inside him clicked. This wasn't about the work or the demands, it was about how he had let everything else take over his life. How had he lost sight of what mattered most? Stoicism wasn't just about dealing with external pressures, it was about creating internal harmony. And Marcus realized that he was failing at both. As the stress piled on, Marcus felt a deep sense of doubt creeping in. The Stoic practices that had once given him peace now felt like a distant dream. He couldn't help but feel that he was losing control of everything, his job, his family, and even his mind. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just struggling with external circumstances, he was struggling to truly live stoically. The biggest obstacle wasn't the work pressure, it was the fear that he might not be capable of living up to the teachings that had once seemed so clear. Was he simply not cut out for this path? Was he too weak to truly transform his life? The weeks that followed became a turning point for Marcus. He knew he couldn't continue down the path he was on, caught in the cycle of stress, doubt, and frustration. He realized that Stoicism wasn't a magic solution to his problems, but rather a practice, a lifelong journey of self-mastery. He began to approach it with a new mindset, not as a way to fix his life, but as a way to live it. Marcus started to integrate Stoic practices into his daily routine more intentionally. Each morning, before the chaos of his day took over, he would wake up early to spend a few quiet moments reflecting on the day ahead. He'd remind himself that he couldn't control the actions of others, but he could control his own reactions. He focused on what was within his control, his thoughts, his actions, his responses. One of the first changes Marcus made was in his communication. He'd always been reactive, responding with frustration or defensiveness when faced with criticism or difficult situations. But now, he practiced listening without judgment. When his boss Gerald gave him another impossible task, Marcus didn't snap back with excuses. Instead, he calmly acknowledged the challenge and asked for a more realistic time frame. To his surprise, Gerald respected his composure and offered more support for the team. At home, things also began to shift. Sarah noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor. He was more present when they talked, more patient when they disagreed. The tension that had been building between them slowly began to dissolve. He started to make more time for her, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. They began to reconnect in ways they hadn't in years. But perhaps the most significant change was how Marcus started to view himself. He no longer saw himself as a victim of his circumstances or as someone who had to constantly prove his worth. Through Stoicism, he found the freedom to live in alignment with his values, regardless of the external noise. He could still work hard, still strive for success, but now he did it from a place of inner peace, not anxiety or desperation. Each day, Marcus faced challenges, some small, some overwhelming, but he no longer saw them as threats. He began to view them as opportunities to practice Stoic principles. Whether it was dealing with a demanding client, navigating office politics, or facing personal setbacks, Marcus approached each situation with the same mindset: what can I control here? How can I respond with purpose? He also began journaling, a key Stoic practice. In his journal, he would write about his thoughts, his feelings, and the lessons he learned each day. This practice became a mirror, reflecting his growth and helping him see how far he had come. Through it all, Elena remained his guiding light. Their conversations deepened as she shared more insights from Stoic philosophy, but Marcus no longer needed her constant reminders. He had internalized the lessons. He had become the master of his own mind. The changes weren't immediate, and they weren't perfect. Marcus still had moments of doubt and frustration. But each day, he felt more confident, more capable, and more aligned with his purpose. He was no longer driven by the need to succeed at any cost. His success was no longer defined by external achievements, but by the peace he found within himself. The day of the big presentation arrived, and Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. This was the moment he had been preparing for, his chance to prove not only his professional worth but his ability to remain composed and purposeful under pressure. As he stood outside the conference room, the familiar anxiety began to creep in, but this time, something was different. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He recalled the teachings of Marcus Aurelius: you have power over your mind, not outside events. The door to the room opened, and he stepped inside. The board members were already seated, their eyes scanning their papers. Gerald, his boss, looked up and gave a curt nod. Marcus felt the old tension rise, but he quickly calmed himself. He could control his response. As the presentation began, Marcus felt the eyes of the room on him. His heart raced, but he focused on his breathing, grounding himself in the present moment. He spoke clearly, without rushing, making eye contact with the board members. He didn't focus on the pressure of impressing them. Instead, he focused on delivering his message with clarity and purpose. Halfway through, Gerald interrupted, throwing a challenging question Marcus's way, trying to throw him off. In the past, Marcus would have panicked, maybe even become defensive. But now, he paused, calmly considered the question, and answered with measured confidence. "That's an excellent point, Gerald. Let me provide further clarification," Marcus said, his tone steady, his mind clear. The room was silent for a moment before Gerald nodded in approval. Marcus could feel the shift, the calmness in the room, the respect growing toward him. He was no longer just answering questions, he was engaging in a dialogue, offering solutions, not just responses. The climax of his journey had arrived. He was in control, not of the situation, but of himself. This was the power he had been seeking, not in controlling others, but in controlling his reactions. When the presentation ended, the board members seemed impressed. They weren't just impressed by the numbers or the strategy, they were impressed by the composure Marcus had shown under pressure. As they discussed next steps, Marcus felt a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't just a career-defining moment, it was a life-defining moment. He had done it. He had spoken with purpose, and in doing so, he had lived with power. As Marcus left the boardroom, his thoughts were racing, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. He had just stood up to one of the most intimidating people he knew, his boss, Gerald, and stayed calm. His mind replayed the moment he answered Gerald's difficult question. The confidence in his voice surprised even him. But what Marcus didn't know was that the respect he had earned wasn't just because of his presentation, it was because of his newfound composure. The board members, seated in the room just moments ago, exchanged glances as the door closed behind Marcus. Gerald looked around at the others, his eyebrows raised. "I've never seen him like that before," he remarked. "He's different." The others nodded, still processing the calmness that had washed over Marcus. The man who had once been reactive, stressed, and flustered, was now poised and confident. Gerald had assumed the pressure would break Marcus, but instead, it had shaped him into something more powerful, something they had all overlooked. Meanwhile, Marcus was unaware of how his transformation had affected those around him. He walked down the hallway with a quiet pride, still uncertain whether he had truly mastered himself. He hadn't noticed how his demeanor had shifted, how the tension in his posture had dissolved. He was still processing the fact that he had handled the situation with such ease. What he didn't realize was that his calmness had set a new standard in the room. The board members saw him as someone who had not just overcome the pressure but had thrived under it. As Marcus reached the elevator, he reflected on his journey, how far he had come from the overwhelmed, anxious man he used to be. But little did he know, this was just the beginning. His internal shift was already having a ripple effect on the people around him. The respect he'd earned that day wasn't just for his professional acumen, it was for the peace he had found within himself. Over the following weeks, Marcus began to see the profound changes in himself. He had initially started his Stoic journey out of necessity, feeling overwhelmed and disconnected, but now, it was as if he had unlocked a new version of himself. His colleagues noticed the change first. He was no longer the man who snapped under pressure, nor was he the silent one who just nodded and agreed to avoid conflict. Marcus had become a calm force in the office, responding to challenges with a level-headed approach. His leadership skills grew, not through dominance, but through patience and understanding. One afternoon, Marcus sat in a meeting, listening to his team present their ideas for a new project. In the past, he would have been quick to judge or make decisions without considering everyone's input. But now, he listened with intention, asking thoughtful questions, and providing feedback that felt more like a collaboration than a command. His words were measured, not because he was holding back, but because he had learned the power of silence and reflection. In his personal life, Marcus had also become more attuned to his emotions. When Sarah, his wife, shared her frustrations about how busy he had been, he no longer reacted defensively. Instead, he paused, acknowledged her feelings, and took responsibility for his part in their disconnect. "You're right," he said, his voice calm. "I've been too focused on work, and I haven't been present. I'll work on that." It wasn't a perfect conversation, but the shift was clear. He was no longer reactive. He was reflective and intentional in his responses. The transformation was evident in his family, too. Marcus started spending more time with Sarah, not just physically, but emotionally. They began to rebuild their connection, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of presence and understanding. The Stoic practice of focusing on the present moment helped Marcus realize that true connection didn't come from grand moments but from the everyday interactions that often went unnoticed. Through his interactions at work and at home, Marcus began to see the power of his newfound character. He wasn't trying to change the world around him, he was simply changing the way he interacted with it. And as he did, the world around him began to change too. As Marcus continued to grow, the rewards of his transformation began to unfold in unexpected ways. He no longer chased success in the traditional sense, but rather embraced the process of living in alignment with his values. His daily practices, morning reflections, journaling, and mindful interactions, had become second nature. He felt more at peace with himself than ever before, and that peace radiated outward, influencing his work and personal relationships in ways he hadn't imagined. But the real payoff came when Marcus faced his next challenge, a major company-wide presentation. The stakes were high, and this time, there was no room for failure. It wasn't just about hitting the numbers, it was about showing the board that Marcus had the vision to lead with purpose and clarity. In the past, he would have been consumed by anxiety, the pressure weighing on his every word. But now, he was different. Marcus had mastered the Stoic practice of focusing on what he could control and letting go of everything else. Leading up to the presentation, he meticulously planned, focusing not just on the facts and figures but on how he wanted to present himself. He knew the importance of staying composed under pressure, so he practiced staying grounded in the present, especially when things felt overwhelming. The day of the presentation, Marcus was calm, confident, and fully present. As he walked into the room, he felt the familiar sense of anxiety rising, but he quickly grounded himself with a deep breath and a moment of reflection. When he began speaking, there was no rush, no panic, just clarity. Marcus didn't try to impress anyone, he simply spoke with purpose, sharing his vision and ideas with conviction. When challenges came from the board members, he responded calmly, not with defensiveness or anxiety, but with well-thought-out answers that reflected his Stoic mindset. The outcome wasn't just about the project, it was about how he had grown into the person he was now. The feedback from the board was overwhelmingly positive. They weren't just impressed with the numbers, they respected his leadership, his calm, and his ability to communicate effectively under pressure. Marcus had done it. The payoff wasn't just career success, it was a deep sense of fulfillment and inner strength that he had earned through his commitment to living with purpose. With each passing day, Marcus's life became a series of intentional actions, guided by the principles of Stoicism. The tasks that once overwhelmed him were now approached with a calm determination. At work, he no longer reacted impulsively to challenges. He took his time, considering each decision carefully, weighing what was within his control and letting go of what wasn't. His colleagues noticed the shift in his approach, as he made decisions more confidently, even when the stakes were high. Marcus understood that action wasn't about rushing to get things done, it was about choosing the right course of action with a clear mind. At home, his relationship with Sarah continued to improve. Instead of getting defensive during arguments, Marcus now focused on understanding her point of view. He didn't try to solve every problem immediately but allowed space for reflection and conversation. Their discussions became more meaningful, and Sarah started to feel heard and valued again. The tension that had once been a constant undercurrent in their marriage began to dissolve, replaced by a deeper connection and mutual respect. Even in his personal life, Marcus's actions were thoughtful and deliberate. When faced with moments of stress, he reminded himself of his Stoic practices, pausing before reacting, focusing on his breath, and choosing to respond with purpose. Whether he was dealing with a personal setback or an unexpected challenge, Marcus remained grounded, knowing that how he responded mattered more than the situation itself. The Stoic principles of daily reflection, mindfulness, and self-discipline were no longer just concepts Marcus studied, they had become part of who he was. He found himself waking up each day with a sense of clarity, ready to face whatever came his way, not as a reactive force but as a purposeful and deliberate one. His actions spoke louder than words, reflecting the internal peace he had worked so hard to cultivate. And with every decision he made, whether big or small, Marcus grew more confident in his ability to navigate life with strength and composure. As Marcus continued to embrace the Stoic way of life, he began to notice something incredible: everything seemed to fall into place. His work, his relationships, and his personal life all started to align in a way he had never experienced before. There were no longer separate parts of his life that felt disconnected or at odds with each other. The principles he applied at work, the calmness, the patience, the clarity, were the same ones he practiced at home with Sarah, with friends, and even with strangers. The unity Marcus had sought within himself began to manifest in the world around him. The challenges he once saw as obstacles were now viewed as opportunities for growth. The difficult conversations at work no longer felt like battles to win but chances to practice patience, understanding, and problem-solving. The moments of tension with Sarah became chances for connection and deeper communication. Even in the smallest daily tasks, responding to emails, having a conversation with a colleague, or deciding what to eat for lunch, Marcus applied the same Stoic mindset, focusing on what he could control, accepting what he couldn't, and always striving for a calm and balanced perspective. It wasn't always perfect. There were still moments of frustration, still times when the weight of the world felt too heavy. But Marcus no longer felt the need to fight against the currents of life. He had learned to flow with them, trusting in his ability to respond with purpose, no matter what came his way. His life was no longer a series of disconnected events. Each action, each decision, was part of a larger, coherent whole. The unity he had cultivated within himself was reflected in every aspect of his life. This newfound harmony wasn't just about being calm in difficult moments, it was about living with intention, knowing that every decision, no matter how small, was an opportunity to practice Stoic discipline. Marcus no longer felt like he was living on autopilot, reacting to the world around him. Instead, he was the architect of his own life, building a future based on inner peace and strength. The days following Marcus's successful presentation were filled with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The external rewards, praise from his boss, new opportunities at work, were validating, but what Marcus cherished most was the internal transformation he had experienced. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with who he was, and it wasn't dependent on external achievements. Marcus no longer measured his success by the titles he held or the accolades he received. The true reward was the calmness he carried within, the clarity of purpose that guided his every action. His relationship with Sarah had deepened. The small moments they shared, like cooking dinner together or sitting on the porch in silence, had become meaningful again. No longer consumed by the chaos of his work life, Marcus was present in their conversations, listening without judgment, and responding with patience. Sarah noticed the difference and commented on how much more engaged he seemed. "I don't know what's changed, Marcus, but I love this version of you," she said one evening. And Marcus realized it wasn't just about being present, it was about being present, with full awareness and intention. At work, things had shifted as well. Marcus had become someone people turned to for guidance, not just for answers but for perspective. His colleagues admired his ability to stay calm in the face of adversity, and his leadership had become more natural. He didn't need to exert force or control, his steady presence was enough. The power of Stoicism wasn't just in overcoming challenges, it was in how Marcus had learned to live with them, embracing each one as a chance for growth. The aftermath wasn't about grand changes or dramatic moments, it was the subtle transformation that had occurred within Marcus. His internal peace radiated outward, affecting everything he touched. He was no longer just surviving his life, he was living it with purpose, with intention, and with a newfound sense of power. Marcus had discovered something profound: the true measure of success wasn't in how the world saw him, but in how he saw himself and how he navigated each moment with clarity and control. As he reflected on his journey, Marcus knew that Stoicism was not a one-time solution, it was a lifelong commitment. He would continue to face challenges, but now he had the tools to approach them with the same mindset he had cultivated. The power wasn't in avoiding hardship, it was in embracing it and responding with purpose.